Ukraine. Let me go to Cormac Smith, first of all, the former advisor to Ukrainian Foreign Ministry. Liz Truss, new British Prime Minister, as determined as Boris Johnson, their predecessor, to offer full support from this country to Ukraine in this battle with Russia. Presumably you would support that.
Piers, first, thank you very much for having me on. Yes, I would support it, absolutely. There's two things I'd like to say, Piers. First is we have a moral obligation to support Ukraine. This is the most diabolical act of aggression against a sovereign and peaceful country that we have seen on European soil since 1939 to 1945. There is no doubt about it. Putin is the Hitler of the 21st century. You know, I don't need to retell the horrible atrocities that Russian troops have been carrying out in Ukraine. But secondly, even if we don't have a moral compass and feel that we have a moral obligation to this, you know, it's in our interest. Russia has been waging a hybrid war against the West for almost a decade, certainly since the illegal annexation of Crimea. And, you know, we weren't listening in 2017 when Sergei Lavrov went to the Munich Security Conference, and he celebrated the coming asunder of the post-war order, which, you know, has given us the greatest period of peace and prosperity.
No, listen, this is completely the point as far as I'm concerned. But David Kern from the Heritage Party, you don't agree. Why?
No, I don't agree. I mean, what Cormac is not saying is that the West has been poking the bear for 8 years, essentially, and the Ukrainian army and forces, backed by, and part of them...
Well, you think they're justified in invading a sovereign democratic country?
The Ukrainian forces...
Is that what you're saying?
The Ukrainian forces for 8 years have been shelling, maiming, killing ethnic Russians in the Donbass area.
Sorry,
that's true, and that's actually in the OSCE report. For 14,000 people, 14,000 Russian people have been killed by the Azov battalion and forces, which are part of the Ukrainian armed forces.
Do you think Putin is justified in what he's doing?
What he's doing, I think, is trying to protect the ethnic Russians in eastern Ukraine.
And it's waging genocide against the Ukrainian people.
Not at all.
Seizing land that doesn't belong to him.
The situation in the Donbass, the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, is exactly analogous to the situation in Kosovo in the 90s, and the West supported Kosovo coming out of Yugoslavia, coming out of Serbia. I'm not saying that we want this war. We could have sat down at the beginning of this in February, and we could have avoided this situation. They wouldn't have had to do that. We could have just had a negotiation and not been poking the bear, as I said, for 8 years.
So Putin says, you know what, I quite fancy Latvia. You give him half of Latvia?
Well, that's conjecture. He's not doing that.
But you know how he's thinking, this dictator.
What he said, I mean, they don't call this, they call this a special operation at the moment.
It's a war. It's an illegal war.
The point is, well, we're not at war. No one in the West has declared war on Russia, as far as I know.
I
really hope we haven't, because we don't want to get into a war between the West and Russia.
Vladimir Putin declared war on a completely unaggressive country in terms of Ukraine. They were just trying to defend themselves. I think it's enormously arrogant when people say, you know, they should sit down at the negotiating table and just, well, what negotiation? What is there to give up? There is nothing to trade. I mean, Putin wants to take a big slice, a big hunk out of Ukraine.
Yes, and he wants the Donbass to add to the Crimea. He wants the whole of Ukraine. Be under no illusion. Putin wants the whole of Ukraine. He thinks it should never have been ceded. He thinks the Soviet Union should never have been broken up. He's on record as saying it was a national disgrace. That's why he didn't go to Gorbachev's funeral recently, and he wants the whole thing back. He wants to restore the Soviet Union. He wants to be a czar.
Well, he hasn't said that.
And he's relying, by the way, no disrespect to you, he's relying on people like you to spew the propaganda, justifying what he's doing. He invaded a sovereign, democratically elected country.
I just simply have the opposite opinion, and I think that we should be trying to end this peacefully, because what's happening now...
Have you been to Ukraine?
I've never been to Ukraine. Right, yeah, I mean, what's disturbing to a lot of people today is Liz Truss, and her first thing is saying she's going to send £2.3 billion in lethal aid to Ukraine in order to continue and prolonging this conflict, which we don't need to
try and defeat Putin, which will actually resolve this whole energy crisis in one fell swoop.
What do you want? I mean, what do you want? Do you want
right now, I want to have a break.
Do you want regime change in Russia?
Because
actually, I do want regime change in Russia.
You want
I would like to see the back of Vladimir Putin.
Well, this is what Biden said.
And I say that as somebody on his sanction list, by the way.
We should be de-escalating.
No, actually, I think we should be de-escalating.
David, people like President
guys, time out. Let's take a short break. We'll come back. We're going to continue this debate because actually it's getting interesting. Back after the break. Well, back to Piers Morgan Uncensored. We had a rather lively end to that last segment. We've had to lose two of our guests who were due to leave, so they've gone. And my thanks to Tina Brown and Cormac Smith. But we've kept David Curtin with his rather, in my opinion, incendiary views about Ukraine, and Richard Tyers, who probably shares my views. But let's try and get through this. So, David Curtin, your position is that we poached the Russian bear, and therefore Ukraine is reaping what we sowed.
Partly, yes, because we supported Ukrainian forces, including neo-Nazi battalions like the Azov Battalion, like the Right Sector, for 8 years, who were shelling, killing Russians in the Donbass area, the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics.
You mean after Russia seized
No,
Crimea?
they didn't. They had a referendum, and they decided to join Russia. And they were part of Russia until the 1950s. They were just added to Ukraine later on in the time of Khrushchev. They weren't always
So you
part
don't
of
respect
Ukraine.
the breakup of the Soviet Union? You think it shouldn't have happened?
No, I do. I do think that's a good thing, because I don't support the Soviet Union.
You want Ukraine to now give back the land?
Not at all.
That it has democratically got for itself and has voted to keep.
As I said in the last segment, we supported Kosovo when they wanted to leave Serbia. Crimea wanted to leave Ukraine. It's exactly the same situation. They had a referendum
the same situation.
and they decided to join Russia.
The simple fact is that Putin's Russia invaded a sovereign state. Interestingly, the only part of its border on that western side that's not a member of NATO. And I think that is a key point. He didn't dare touch NATO.
No.
So he's gone into Ukraine. You can't say that he's sort of protecting Russian people. He's gone into someone else's sovereign state. He's murdered women, children and men in the most barbaric.
And by the way, Ukraine,
way.
everyone thought that Ukraine would roll over. Ukraine has put up an unbelievable resistance. And when I went there and interviewed President Zelensky, you could feel it amongst every one of them. They were determined not to give the Russians an inch of their land. Interestingly, Vladimir Putin was due to address the Russian nation today. It's now been delayed until tomorrow. Rumours swirling about what he may be trying to do. Is he going to declare war? Is he going to mobilise the Russian people, which comes if you declare war?
But let's be very clear. The reason the Ukrainians are doing so well, apart from their incredible courage, is because of the weapons.
Our support.
Is the weapons that we in the United States, notably not from other European countries like Germany, but those weapons have made a massive, massive difference.
And my problem, David, with your, in my opinion, rather naive take on this, is that if you think Vladimir Putin, if he succeeds in what he wants in Ukraine, grabbing the Donbass to add to Crimea at the very least, the idea he's going to stop there is for the birds. This guy wants to restore the Soviet Union. He's not going to stop with a bit of Ukraine.
No, I think he will, because, I mean,
Why?
He
told you that?
He stated beforehand exactly what he was going to do. He wants to demilitarize Ukraine. He wanted to denazify. That's his words.
But he's the Nazi. He is the Nazi.
The Azov.
When you say denazify, and by the way,
as
Ukraine's president is Jewish. Right, this idea that
he's supported by Kolomoisky, his oligarch, who also funds the Azov Battalion, who wear Nazi symbols on their flags and their shirts.
What you're saying is exactly the kind of propaganda that is spewed out by Russian state media every single day, that this is justified because the Ukrainians are a bunch of Nazis. Their president is Jewish. Yes. He lost family members in the Holocaust.
But that's nothing to do with what's happening today.
Actually, it's got everything to do with this fanciful notion that this is Vladimir Putin standing up to a bunch of Nazis. It's completely outrageous.
Zelensky is funded by an oligarch called Kolomoisky. And Kolomoisky funds the Azov Battalion.
What's any of this got to do with Vladimir Putin invading the country illegally?
I'm answering the point that Piers has made. Piers is saying that I'm sort of pumping out Russian propaganda.
You are. You're spewing Russian propaganda.
I'm just saying this because I do not want this conflict to go on. I don't want to escalate it.
But you want it to end with Zelensky just saying, take our land.
Negotiate, because the people in the Donbass region and the Crimea are ethnic Russians, and they would.
Do you know what percentage of people in the Donbass actually consider themselves that they want to be Russian?
100% in the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics.
Absolute nonsense.
No, that is the fact. I mean, you can say it's nonsense, but I mean, the people watching can have
the percentage of people in the Donbass that want to go back to being Russian.
The people in the areas...
What percentage of the Donbass? Do you know from the polls?
100%.
It's absolute nonsense. It's like 8% want to be Russian again.
Well, I think people watching can sort of check that out.
You say 100, it's actually 8%.
Obviously, you know, in those areas in the east and south of Ukraine, there's always been a majority of ethnic Russians, and in the west and centre of Ukraine, there's always been a majority
of Ukrainians. The vast majority of people in the Donbass have no desire, which is why they're fighting every single day, risking their lives to stop the Russians
And
taking the land.
And
why the Ukrainians, by the way, have been taking back a lot of territory because they're beginning to win this battle, this war.
They have incurred
You cannot negotiate with a brutal, bullying dictator. History is littered with those examples. The greatest, most horrific of all was Hitler. And you think that you can sort of negotiate with Putin? Forget it. He's a bully. You have to stand up to bullies, rock solid, firm, and you have to push him back. And that is what is happening at the moment.
And actually,
long may it continue.
And when you're talking about Nazification, what Putin's been doing in the Ukraine is utter Nazification. That's what he's been doing. He's been behaving like Adolf Hitler behaved in 1939. And that's why it's incumbent on the world to stop him, and why I applaud Liz Truss for continuing the good work of Boris Johnson in this area of leading the way in Europe to help the Ukrainians win this war. Thank you for joining us. I appreciate it. Thank you, Richard Tice. That's it from me. We'll be back same time tomorrow night. Good night, and remember...